Authorities going door to door in Australia hunting for clues in the New Zealand massacre. And some people try to point the finger at President Trump.
They say, oh my goodness, it must somehow be the president's fault. Speaks to a politicization of everything.
The black boxes from an Ethiopian Airlines flight that crashed last week shows, quote, clear similarities with the crash of the same type of plane in Indonesia last October.
Levees breached and widespread evacuations as Nebraska sees its worst flooding in 50 years. Rivers are at historic levels and have forced hundreds from their homes.
Representative Omar, why do you think people in your own party reacted so strongly against what you said?
I think Islamophobia is very much among the Democratic Party as well as the Republican Party.
Joe Biden's slip-up hints at a presidential run.
I have the most progressive record of anybody running for the anybody who would run.
68 teams, but only one national title. It is time to fill out your March Madness brackets.
Thanks to the earth and the climate, because it's actually going to feel like spring, 50 plus degrees.
You're thinking the climate.
I'm thinking the climate in general.
I'm so ready for some warmth. I am so tired of being cold, guys. I got to tell you, I am ready for some spring clothes. I'm ready for some sunshine. Bring it on.
Okay.
Listen, Jedediah is going to be with us all week.
All week.
Ainsley's off. It's great to have you.
Yeah, troublemaker in the house.
Right, at least 3 hours. Meanwhile, right to a Fox News alert, overnight police raiding homes in Australia. Yes, we know this in connection to the horrific attacks on 2 New Zealand mosques on Thursday night.
The international investigation intensifying as the death toll rises to 50.
Aisha Hosni joins us right now with the surprising move the suspected attacker made. Aisha?
Yes, that is right. Listen to this. A New Zealand paper now reporting the suspect has now fired his lawyer and wants to represent himself in court. And that attorney, former attorney, says he appears to be lucid and was not mentally unstable when making this decision. This follows the police commissioner of New Zealand confirming there is only one suspect here who carried out the mass shootings at 2 mosques in Christchurch. But he did stress that does not mean there weren't possibly some other people out there supporting him in some other way. Australian police are conducting raids on homes, one of them reportedly belonging to the suspect's sister. Meanwhile, New Zealand's Prime Minister announcing gun law reforms will be announced in about 10 days.
I've already made clear that a number of New Zealanders question the availability of military-style semi-automatic weapons in New Zealand. However, I will be giving a more fulsome set of details once we've worked through the in-principle decision that Cabinet has made.
And a Christchurch gun shop owner also just admitted that he was the one who sold the suspect 4 guns and ammo legally and didn't notice any red flags about that man. Steve, Brian, Jedediah.
All right, Aisha, we thank you very much for the live report. As we told you last week when we were covering this massacre live, the guy had a manifesto out there, and it was very clear he is a white supremacist. It's interesting now, though, that he wants to fire his attorney, because clearly he probably wants to spout some of the things in his manifesto out in open court in New Zealand.
Yep. That's exactly right. And many Democrats jumping in on that, of course, because in the manifesto it seemed in some parts that this guy was praising Donald Trump. Of course, I don't pay a lot of credence to what lunatics say in manifestos, but some on the left felt a little differently. Take a listen to what the media and Democrats had to say about Trump and the New Zealand attack.
The president uses language often that's very similar to the language used by these bigots and racists.
I don't think moderate Republicans are doing enough to hold President Trump accountable for his rhetoric.
Many of these people have cited Donald Trump along the way. So to me, that means, at the very least, he is dividing people.
This is a president who has given plenty of rhetorical ammunition, I think, to terrorists like this.
That the president had this opportunity to once again denounce white nationalism. He didn't do that.
No one is blaming the president. To what extent does the president have to take this concern seriously and modify the way he talks about issues like this?
Okay, so it all started with the man who appears to be a white supremacist in New Zealand, and then somehow it has, Brian, been imported here.
Every time somebody like this commits a crime like that and then lists somebody there, I don't really think you should be, if they put Barack Obama's name in the manifesto, I would think it would be unfair to put Barack Obama on the griddle and say his policies during his years, or Clinton or Bush. I just don't think that it's possible to, in one category, say he's a lunatic, he's nuts, he's a cold-blooded killer. At the same time, just go, well, if it wasn't for such and such as language and verbiage, it wouldn't have happened. Mick Mulvaney came loaded for bear at two separate Sunday shows. And I want to make it clear, you cannot equate the two.
There's folks who just don't like the president, and everything that goes wrong, they're going to look for a way to tie that to the president. That's just absurd to say that there's some type of connection between being against illegal immigration, which is what the veto was about, for legal immigration, and the ruthless live streaming of murder of 15 people. The two things have nothing to do with each other. To simply ask the question every time something like this happens overseas, or even domestically, to say, oh my goodness, it must somehow be the president's fault, speaks to a politicization of everything that I think is undermining sort of the institutions that we have in the country today.
And what he's referring to is the word invasion. So the president, while he's in the behind the desk, the Resolute desk, he's talking, and he's talking about immigration, and he says it's an invasion because over 1 million people are supposed to come in the southern border. And they say, well, why is he using the same language as that 28-year-old killer in New Zealand? He's not using the same language. That's the way Trump talks to illustrate what he sees as a problem at the border. Nothing to do with gun control in New Zealand.
And this media language, by the way, I gotta love Stephanopoulos. He's like, oh, we're not blaming Trump. He has to say that as a preface, but then he follows it up, and they all follow it up. But let's examine Trump's language. No, that is a suggestion then that you are linking President Trump to this terrorist, which you can't do regardless of political ideology. You cannot link a maniac and the workings of a maniac to any politician, left or right. That is insane.
Mick Mulvaney made one other great point. He said, you got to figure out why these things are happening, why we do see so many of these killings. And he said, here's the quote, is there something happening in our culture where people go, you know what, I think today I'm going to go on TV and live stream me murdering people. That's what we should be talking about, not the politics of the United States. Because, as we told you last week, he went on Facebook Live for 17 minutes, and you saw him walk in there and just start killing people left and right, to the point where he said, you know what, I didn't even know where to shoot because there were so many targets.
Yep.
It was unbelievable.
Right. Meanwhile, let's change gears and talk about 2020. We saw Beto O'Rourke for the longest time. People were saying when this guy gets in, it's going to be big news, and it was. I get it. When Joe Biden jumps in, it's going to be big news, and it's about to happen. Did Joe Biden once again expose his weakness, his ability to make gaffes? And did he do it in his own run? Or was this on purpose? Oh. Listen to his remarks in Delaware over the weekend.
Folks, I know I get criticized. I'm told I get criticized by the new left. I have the most progressive record of anybody running for the United States, if anybody who would run. I didn't mean. But anybody who would run.
He never lets you down. We
He
love
doesn't.
Joe Biden.
Well, what do you think? Do you think he did that on purpose?
No, it was an accident.
That's Joe being Joe.
Look, it's the game they're playing right now. Everybody knows he's going to run. But for a variety of reasons, he's going to do it in a couple of weeks. And so he's just leading up to that. What's interesting is there's a brand new poll out from Emerson Polling. They talked to the people in Wisconsin. And with this gigantic crop of new faces, look at this. Look at the top two people. Bernie Sanders right now, among Democratic voters, has 40% of the vote. Joe Biden has a quarter. Between the two of them, they have 63%. And these are people who have been in the arena before. It's not the new batch. It's the old batch that's way ahead right now.
Isn't that going to be interesting, too? Where does Joe Biden fit into this kind of crazy left wing? I mean, when you have Bernie Sanders rising to the top, and I've interviewed both of them. I've interviewed Biden and Sanders, and they're very different. Biden is very measured. He listens. Oh, it's drastic. It's drastic. But I'm curious whether Biden is going to like Bernify himself a little bit, and he's going to want to pull aspects of Bernie. Yeah, Bernie. I mean, maybe you never know. But I'm curious to see how this all plays out. The media, of course, was hyping Joe Biden, dropping this hint. Take a listen to what they had to say.
2020 may be more than just a possibility.
He keeps leaving these Easter eggs and dropping these hints about whether or not he may run.
We should be treating him as a presidential candidate that just hasn't filed the papers yet.
All signs are now that he wants to get into this race, and he comes in with a lot of advantages.
That state, by the way, Wisconsin, is a state in which Biden does the strongest over Donald Trump, and the president's got to win Wisconsin to win again. The matchup is also one outside the margin of error with Sanders and Warren both lead Trump 52-48. Harris and Klobuchar are tied with him, but it's so early, within the margin of error. But it's those 7 states. People are going to be looking at, don't look at 50. It's going to come down to 7 states and who does the best there. And will the Democrats pick the best person to win those 7 states, or will they just see who the survivor is, not who the best matchup is?
And will the media establishment, will their choice be the same as the Democratic voters? Because I have a feeling the media establishment's going to push for Biden, thinking, oh, he's more electable, he has the experience, he's part of the Obama ticket, they can use all that legacy that they like. Some of us don't like it so much.
But you know what?
And then there's going to be Bernie on the other side.
I think you're probably right. But I also think Joe Biden has been kicking himself because he did not run last time. He had he said when his son died, his heart wasn't in it, and he's been looking ever since, and he'd gone, you know what, I could have won.
Yeah.
Joe Biden is saying to himself.
Also, David Plouffe is with Beto O'Rourke. David Plouffe, a major Obama strategist. Why would you not stay back and see if you really want Biden?
Especially
I
if
think
Beto's
so.
going to be
The Obama people don't want Biden. That's what I think the big story is.
That's a big take. Let us know, though. Friends at FoxNews.com. I want to know what you think. Do you think Biden's going to be the guy to beat? Is Bernie going to be the guy to beat? Tell us what you think.
All right. It says Carly Shimkus is doing it. Is this true?
Did you just say Carly Shimkus is the one to beat? I
in the
agree with you
house.
there.
It's you.
Good morning, guys. How are you? All right, let's get to extreme weather right now. Hundreds forced from their homes as fierce flooding pounds the Midwest. Crews rescuing nearly 300 people from washed-out neighborhoods in Nebraska. Floodwaters have overcome 1/3 of the Offutt Air Force Base, damaging 60 buildings. Record flooding already recorded in 17 areas, and it is expected to get worse. The Missouri River is set to crest at nearly 48 feet tomorrow. Early evidence shows clear similarities between 2 deadly plane crashes involving Boeing 737 MAX 8 jets. Ethiopian officials say black box data from last week's crash that killed 57 people is reminiscent of the Lion Air disaster that killed 189 people. In both, pilots struggled to control the plane and tried to return to the airport. President Trump is pushing General Motors to reopen its closed Ohio plant that left 1,700 people without a job. After speaking to CEO Mary Barra, the president tweeting, "I asked her to sell it or do something quickly. She blamed the United Automobile Workers Union. I don't care. I just want it open." GM responding in a statement, quote, "To be clear, the ultimate future of the unallocated plants will be resolved between GM and the UAW." And those guys are your headlines.
That's right.
Thanks, Carly.
Yeah, we'll be talking about that a little bit later. All right. Thanks, Carly. 13 minutes after the hour.
Democrats say paying for the border wall isn't worth it, but our next guest says it's peanuts compared to the real cost of illegal immigration. Stick around for the numbers from Betsy McCoy coming up next.
Plus, driver tests out his Tesla autopilot using his wife as a guinea pig.
No.
So, what happened? We'll let you know.
President Trump fighting to get money for his border wall while Democrats bash it as ineffective and expensive. Well, our next guest, writing a new op-ed in the New York Post, says we can't afford not to build the wall, arguing the investment is peanuts compared to what the real cost is of illegal immigration in the United States. Here to break down those costs, Betsy McCoy, former lieutenant governor of the great state of New York. Good morning to you, Betsy.
Good morning. That's right. Politicians are not leveling with us about what we're already being forced to spend to shelter the illegal immigrants coming across the southern border, most of them falsely claiming to be asylum seekers. The numbers are staggering. In fact, so staggering that deterring this crossing, this asylum scam, would more than pay for the wall in less than 2 years. No other public infrastructure project would get paid back so fast.
In 2 years. Let's look at some of the numbers. First of all, we know that the president has requested $8.6 billion to build the wall. That's short of the total cost. But then when you look at the next number, the number of illegal crossings in February was 76,000. And then, and this is a head scratcher right here, the cost of sheltering each unaccompanied teenager is, and I didn't realize it was this high, $775 per day. And I think that is at the Homestead Air Force Base facility down in Florida.
That's right. And the Department of Health and Human Services is operating 130 of these shelters around the country. Some are less expensive, but they're all very expensive. And the fact is that if you add up the costs, we've got $3 billion a year spent last year housing families and single adults, plus about $2.5 billion housing the unaccompanied teens. So you're up toward $5 billion, right? $5 billion before the surge. As you pointed out, 76,000 migrants in February compared with 463,000 for all of last year. So we could be here seeing 1 million migrants, double last year's numbers.
But Betsy, you know that it wasn't until Donald Trump became president that anybody ever said a wall doesn't work. Now, you know, many on the right have said they are trying to deny the president a win.
That's right. The Democrats and many Republicans, 25 in Congress, voted against the emergency declaration. But when you look at what taxpayers are being forced to spend to house these fake asylum seekers, it's staggering. And the president, believe it or not, actually cares about taxpayers. Right on his budget, it says putting taxpayers first, and he's doing it by trying to stop this unnecessary expense. And I have to say, when I look at his Remain in Mexico program, many people have not heard about this yet. He's going to make Mexico the waiting room for these
as people wait for
asylum
their
seekers.
And some will be granted asylum, but we've heard a
very
majority
small, 7.5% of people from Honduras, for example, 11% of people from Guatemala. Most of them are not legitimate asylum seekers. But kudos to the president for finding a way to save taxpayers from being literally clobbered with this expense.
Betsy McCoy, thanks for giving us those numbers. All right. Meanwhile, should you have to prove you're a citizen before you vote? Seems like a no-brainer, right? Wrong. Big case headed to court today. And it's March Madness 2020 edition. We're breaking down the brackets for the Democratic contenders. Next.
Fox and Friends is brought to you by Purdue University Global.
Purdue University Global. There's no limit to what you can achieve. And now, there's no limit to how.
Welcome back. Some quick headlines for you on big cases on the docket today. The U.S. Supreme Court will hear arguments in a Virginia gerrymandering case. Republican leaders there want the justices to overturn a lower court ruling that found 11 districts were racially gerrymandered. The GOP has a tight 51-49 majority in the Virginia House of Delegates. And a federal appeals court will weigh a proof of citizenship voting law in Kansas. It was blocked in 2016. It required people to provide documents showing they are an American citizen before registering to vote. Back over to you, Brian.
You're going to love this. New York, we're going to do some bracketology, political style. New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand officially jumping into the already crowded field of Democratic 2020 candidates. She went from exploratory to actually in. And now that March is underway, we decide to stack up the candidates like it is a NCAA tournament one-on-one. Former Trump campaign pollster Jim McLaughlin's here with some matchups. You ready, Jim?
Yes.
All right, you looked at some of the matchups, so let's get started. First off, Kirsten Gillibrand, who will officially declare she's going to run in front of Trump Tower against businessman from New York, Andrew Yang.
Yep, she's trying to run as the female candidate. She actually attacked Beto O'Rourke last week for basically being a white male. And then you have somebody like Andrew Yang, where most people are probably saying, Andrew who? He's a businessman, but he's got money, and he's looking to appeal to that outsider, that left-wing voter that in the Democratic primary.
She's been exploring her for a few weeks. I didn't see any gain, and she continues to flip-flop. She ran as a conservative Democrat. Now she's liberal, so you have to wonder what she stands for. Let's talk about Beto O'Rourke and Amy Klobuchar. Over the weekend, Klobuchar made it clear she wasn't born to run like Beto O'Rourke claimed to at that Vanity Fair article.
It's interesting. Beto O'Rourke is basically in single digits in the Democratic primary. You know, you have Sanders and Biden as the front runners, yet Klobuchar, Gillibrand, they all attacked him. So you can see the fear there. And there's a lot of Democrats that say he's, in a lot of ways, he's the heir to Barack Obama.
Well, because especially with David Plouffe as his guy, the question is, with all his confidence, will he listen to some coaching? Let's take this matchup here. Julian Castro, who's got some Obama executive level experience with the Obama White House, and Elizabeth Warren. We know about her hiccups, but she's been indefatigable from day one, the first one in.
Yep, she probably should have run 4 years ago, because I think she could have beaten Hillary Clinton there. She's the one kind of in the Democratic polls right now. She's running third to Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. So she's got a little bit of momentum, but she has definitely had her missteps with the announcement and whatnot.
With her announcement, I'm going to get me a beer,
Yep.
but with taking on those the .coms and the social media, I think that some people can relate to that. Now, Jay Inslee, governor of Washington, against John Delaney. He calls himself a moderate Democrat. With Inslee, he wants the environmental.
Yep.
All about environment.
With Inslee, it's all about the environment. He was kind of Green New Deal before there was a Green New Deal. And a lot of people, again, are saying John who? But he was the first one to actually announce. And again, he's a businessman. He's trying to run as a moderate. His big opponent is going to be somebody like Joe Biden, who's trying to be that establishment Democrat.
And this governor put a carbon tax on this platform and couldn't even pass it in Washington. Let's move ahead now and talk about Governor John Hickenlooper. I don't think I'm a capitalist, but I am, but just don't tell anybody. Against Cory Booker. He's a happy-go-lucky campaigner.
Yep. 1 second he's saying he's going to bring people together. He wants to run with civility, but then all he does is attack Donald Trump. I think Cory Booker is one of those guys. He's really running for vice president as opposed to actually running for president.
That's interesting. And he's somebody who came in and listened for a year and then asserted himself. Kamala Harris against Tulsi Gabbard. Gabbard, of course, from Hawaii, congresswoman who served in the military, seems to have a trouble condemning Assad. That stands out. Kamala Harris, the best rollout, maybe the kind of speech with the biggest crowd. But since then, a lot of flip-flops.
Yep. And you know what? I think these are two real underdogs here that have a real shot. If you ask me today, I think Kamala Harris fits the mold of who the Democratic primary voters are looking for. But again, she's a former prosecutor. She's backtracked on her record as a prosecutor. That used to be a positive in a primary for president.
Seems like she just goes with what's popular. We don't know what she stands for, but what she does is has a lot of talent. And here are the final. Okay, there it is. Here we go. Turn around. These are the picks. Who advances and who doesn't. Let's go downstairs. Well, actually, let's just see who won. So you have on the other side.
You got Bernie Sanders and you have they have Joe Biden coming out on top.
All right. Tomorrow we're going to look at more matchups as we see who's gained. So in particular, a lot of excitement on each side, but it's so early. The first debate comes in June.
It is so early, and who's going to be the candidate? Like Donald Trump. The day he came down on that escalator, he dominated the primary. We haven't seen that from the Democrats this time.
I know. There's no early lead, except maybe Bernie Sanders, perhaps, because he's the most well-known. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Back tomorrow. We'll talk about it again. How to avoid ICE for kids, the comic book. I'm not kidding. From getting away from the feds. And it's the part of my exclusive with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. We got on our feet. We walked around. He gave me a brief tour behind the scenes at the State Department. Don't move.
Okay, welcome back. Look at our top headlines this morning. Police confirmed there was only one shooter in the heinous attack on 2 New Zealand mosques. A massive international investigation now intensifying as authorities raid 2 homes in Australia overnight. The death toll has now climbed to 50.
Early evidence shows clear similarities between 2 deadly plane crashes involving Boeing 737 MAX 8 jets. Ethiopian officials say black box data from the wreck that killed 157 people is reminiscent of the Lion Air October crash that killed 189 people. In both cases, pilots struggled to control the plane before crashing.
Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen giving a major speech on the state of Homeland Security today. She's expected to expand on the current situation along our southern border, which the Trump administration says is a national emergency.
The nation's top general denying reports that the United States has drastically reversed course from a withdrawal from Syria. General Joseph Dunford, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, saying in a statement, there has been no change to the plan announced in February, and we continue to implement the president's direction to draw down U.S. forces to a residual presence. The Wall Street Journal had reported the U.S. plan to leave up to 1,000 troops inside Syria. Minnesota Congresswoman Ilhan Omar pens a new op-ed supporting a two-state solution for the Israel-Palestine conflict. The freshman Democrat writing in the Washington Post, quote, "My goal in speaking out at all times has been to encourage both sides to move towards a peaceful two-state solution. We need to reinsert this call back into the public debate with urgency." Omar has faced backlash from Republicans and Democrats over anti-Israel comments. The U.S. Supreme Court will hear arguments today in a gerrymandering case out of Virginia. Republican leaders in the state want the justice to overturn a lower court ruling that found 11 districts were racially gerrymandering. The GOP has a tight 51-49 majority in the Virginia House of Delegates. The outcome in today's case will impact 370,000 voters. Lawmakers in New Mexico want to replace Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day. The bill passed the state House and Senate and now sits on the governor's desk. Supporters say the change would recognize discrimination against Native Americans and better reflect the state's culture.
Okay, Joe Biden's slip-up hints at a presidential run.
Folks, I know I get criticized. I'm told I get criticized by the new left. I have the most progressive record of anybody running for the anybody who would run. I didn't mean. Than anybody who would run.
All right, there it was. The former vice president still leading in the polls for 2020 contenders, even though he's not officially in. He's followed by Senator Bernie Sanders. So the question, will Democrats ultimately choose the establishment path, the Biden path, or move the socialist way, move further to the left? Here to debate that, political analyst Ron Meyer and Democratic strategist Molly Mitchell. Molly, I want to start with you. Biden says he's got the most progressive voting record. I find that hard to believe. What do you think?
I think that's just a talking point.
Yep.
And we know that for primaries, people are always pulled on either side, farther to the left or the right. And I think Biden, during his speech, was acknowledging that. But I think Joe Biden has the best problem out of anyone who is running. I mean, he hasn't even announced, just like you said, and he's leading in the polls in Iowa. And the progressive lane is extremely crowded, even with Bernie leading it right now.
Ron, let's look at some information here. Let's pull up Biden versus Bernie as we take a look at this, assuming Biden gets in, which I think is about 95% of surety right now. 27% on Biden. Bernie is moving along quite nicely and closing that gap, though. It was a much wider gap maybe just a month ago. And then let's take a look at Joe Biden's history here. He does have a very bipartisan history, as he calls himself very progressive, but these are some more conservative bills that he has supported in the past. Bankruptcy reform, you see a drug bill there, the RAVE Act, another drug bill at the bottom, crime bill, Defense of Marriage Act back in 1996. I mean, when he calls himself a progressive, do you buy it?
A lot of those, I mean, look at most of those things. President Trump is more progressive than he is, right? Yeah. I mean, that's the irony, is President Trump has a more progressive record as president than Joe Biden does on many of those votes. Look at the crime bill. It wasn't just called the Clinton crime bill. Who was the chief sponsor? Joe Biden. President Trump just did criminal justice reform, which overturned most of the what are seen as racist laws that are implemented in 1994. Look at the Iraq war vote. Joe Biden was one of the chief cheerleaders where President Trump opposed that. And then look at Wall Street. You know, Joe Biden represented Delaware, which has a lot of the banks. He led the bank's effort to crack down on students, on graduates who had high loan debt. And so a lot of these things are going to be really troublesome when Bernie Sanders starts coming after him and going after his record. You know, I think that gap is going to shrink. I see Bernie Sanders going up in the polls. I see Biden going down. Everybody likes Uncle Joe right now. When Sanders starts going after Joe Biden's record, I think a lot of the progressives are going to leave.
Yeah, Molly, you see in the regular election, after you get through the primaries, who do you think has a better shot, Biden or Bernie versus Trump?
Definitely, I think Biden over Bernie Sanders, but I think we just have to also remember we're still 9 months out from the first primary and over a year away from the convention. So much is going to change between now and then, and the other candidates polled, they don't have as much name recognition yet. So I think at this point it's just way too early to say it's going to come down to Bernie versus Biden. It's just too early.
Okay, yeah. I mean, my buddy has a little gambling app in Vegas, and you can bet on who's going to win the 2020 election or get the nomination. And right now the leader is Kamala Harris. She has the best numbers. We'll see. All right, guys, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
All right, the time now is 36 minutes after the hour. This Vietnam veteran's life saved on the battlefield by a medic after stepping on a landmine. Now, 50 years later, he's thanking him face to face. They join us live.
Wow. And get your daily fix of caffeine by subscription. A major fast food chain wants you to pay by the month. Stay tuned.
All right, good morning. Welcome back. The Department of Transportation is digging into the FAA's approval of the Boeing 737 MAX 8 planes after a deadly crash that killed 157 people last week.
Yeah, Tracy Carrasco from our sister network, Fox Business, has the latest on that probe. Hey, Tracy.
Good morning, guys. Yes, in addition to that, federal prosecutors are reportedly scrutinizing the development of these planes, the 737 MAX planes. The Wall Street Journal says a grand jury in Washington, D.C. has reportedly issued a subpoena to one person regarding the development of these planes, requesting more documents. That subpoena was sent just one day after the deadly accident last weekend in Ethiopia. I want to mention shares of Boeing. We are continuing to watch those very closely. Looks like they could be starting the second week in the red. Right now, shares of Boeing down more than 2% in the pre-market.
All right, and good news for people who love coffee. You can now buy a subscription.
Yes, I think this is a great idea. Burger King is offering a $5 a month subscription for coffee. So you can get one cup of coffee every single day, anytime at Burger King, a participating Burger King. So to sign up for this subscription service, you've just got to download Burger King's app. Go to the app. That's how you do it. But I think this would be a great thing for Burger King because once you're in there, you buy the subscription, you're going to look at the breakfast menu. You're going to look at other things, buy things to go along with your coffee. It worked for McDonald's. We saw when they really turned around their breakfast menu, it brought their earnings up. So
right, it gets you going to Burger King every day.
That is
yes, it
and
does.
then you're getting
a
breakfast.
good idea.
I know, and that's about the cost of one cup of coffee at Starbucks. Yeah,
we're here
Crazy.
for it.
Thanks
I like
so
that.
much.
Thanks.
The co-founder of the environmentalist group Greenpeace claims that Google is scrubbing him from history. Patrick Moore tweeting two screenshots of a recent search of the group's founders. The top row, he says, is what the search engine now shows, and there's no mention of him. The bottom row, which he searched a few days ago, does include himself. Moore left Greenpeace after 15 years and has been critical of some of its stances. He also recently criticized Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for her Green New Deal. Wow.
Actor Dean Cain is firing back at critics attacking him for defending free speech. Cain slammed online for suggesting that an Australian senator shouldn't have been assaulted over controversial comments. This video going viral after a protester egged the senator for his response to the New Zealand mosque attacks. Cain telling the Daily Caller that no one should be attacked for their political views, regardless of how abhorrent they are. He added, quote, "While I totally disagree with what I've seen of the senator's positions, is it illegal for him to hold them? Should he be physically attacked because of them?"
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's check in with Steve Doocy. Let's see what's coming up here in about 18 minutes. Hey, Steve.
I haven't been watching the news this weekend. I just saw the video of
You
the
missed
kid
the
with the
egg?
egg for the first time.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
It's a big one.
Right, just, yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
We're going to have Joy Jones join us to talk about if that happened to him, what would he do? Also, a lot of news. The president's been tweeting about General Motors. Hey, why'd you close down that plant in Ohio? So we're going to talk to all sorts of people about that, including the counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway. She's going to be joining us from the White House. Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz, and Charles Payne, host of Making Money on the Fox Business Network. So we have a busy 3 hours, Carly and Rob, that starts about 17 minutes from right now, right here on the channel. Everybody, trust for the morning news.
Can't wait for that to begin. Sounds like it's going to be a good show.
Thanks, Shimkus.
I'll see you in a couple minutes.
All right.
We'll be right back. 5 MS-13 gang members now accused of stabbing a 16-year-old 100 times before setting his body on fire and dumping him on the side of a road in Virginia. That boy and his family fleeing El Salvador after he was forced to join that gang there. So is this further proof of the situation at the border? The administration calls it an emergency. Here to weigh in is Border Patrol agent and Vice President of the National Border Patrol Council, Hector Garza. Thank you so much for coming on, Hector. you hear these stories time and time again. I still remember the story of the 2 girls on Long Island, and the brutality is just terrible. What do you make of this?
Well, this is just another example of the humanitarian and border security crisis that we're seeing along the border. Now, as Border Patrol agents, we've been sounding the alarm that this is the type of violence that an unsecured border creates. And that is why we need to make sure that we do have the funding and the resources to secure the border. We do know that MS-13 is a very dangerous international gang that is infiltrating our communities, and it's having very serious and negative effects in our American towns.
Yeah, just some numbers here. Let's show you in 2018, in the fiscal year, more than 2,000 MS-13 gang members were arrested in this country. I want to ask you, we're seeing such a steady stream of unaccompanied minors coming into this country. And I've always heard from law enforcement that they are so vulnerable to this gang because they come here and they're kind of lost when they arrive. They're teenagers and the gang recruits and takes them in. Does that sound right?
Yeah, and that is part of the humanitarian crisis where these unaccompanied children are being recruited and targeted by MS-13. They are recruited in their home countries, and they're also recruited here in the United States. And that's why we see these types of crimes that are very serious. Now, we have a long list of angel moms that have been affected by some of these illegal aliens that have committed very serious crimes. So we do need to get serious because, plain and simple, this is violence that is pouring across the border due to a non-secure border.
A lot of people point to, wanting to fix this problem in Central America. That's something that has been tried for a long time. Is that the way to go here, to try and fund their life there and try to improve the quality of life for these countries?
So I'm sure that there's a lot of things that can be done in these countries to better their situation out there. But first and foremost, we have to take care of America first. And that's what President Trump has been talking about. Take care of America first. Make sure that we're protected. Make sure that our Border Patrol agents have the resources along the border. Make sure that we have the proper physical barriers, infrastructure, and technology. And then, let's worry about Central America and what else we can do with these countries. But first, let's worry about the United States first. That needs to be priority number one.
Do you feel like many people on the left are ignoring your agency when you guys say, hey, we're telling you what we need? We need barriers of some sort. We need at least a few hundred miles of barriers to help us do our job. And you basically get ignored a lot of the time by many on the left.
Of course, that's been happening, and we've been meeting with members of Congress to let them know the stories on the border, to let them know the realities, to make sure that we don't let the fake news media dictate what's happening on the border. But unfortunately, our Border Patrol agents are being ignored. Our ICE agents are being ignored, and we have to make sure that our congressional leaders pay attention to the border security experts. Now, President Trump has done a great job in meeting with our Border Patrol agents, and he's one of the first presidents that's meeting with the rank and file agents to actually get the first-hand stories of what's happening in our situation on the border. And we just hope that those members of Congress do the same thing.
Yeah, even the New York Times now says that the border is at a breaking point, that this is not sustainable. It is a situation. All right, thank you, sir, very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Carly, over to you.
All right, thanks, Rob. Listen to this. He lost both of his legs and one arm after stepping on a landmine while serving his country in Vietnam. But Dennis Joyner never got to personally thank the medic who saved his life. Until now, 50 years later, Vietnam veterans Dennis Joyner and paramedic Dewey Doc Hayes finally reunited, and they join us now. Guys, it is so cool to see you together. What a full circle, incredible story. I want to first start off by thanking you for your service. And I want to first talk about the past, and then we'll talk about how you two reconnected. So, Dennis, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about that day in 1969 when you sustained your injuries? What happened?
Well, we were out on a mission, and I tripped a landmine. I don't remember the explosion when it happened that day. I don't remember flying up in the air. I remember falling back down. I never lost consciousness at all, so I was able to see the extent of my injuries. I, of course, immediately was screaming for help. My sergeant was the closest one to me, got to me first, and of course they contacted or hollered for the medic, and Doc came running, and between the two of them, they worked on me for just a little bit, and until they were able to get a chopper in and get the bleeding stopped. And basically, without Doc Hayes and Ed Reynolds that day, I wouldn't be here to have the opportunity.
Yeah. So, Doc, I'm sure you saw a lot of severely injured people during your time in Vietnam. Do you remember this? Do you remember helping him out?
Yes, very much so.
All right, what condition was he in when you saw him?
Well, he was awake and aware of of what happened to him, and I got up. First thing I did was give him morphine. And started. Ed Reynolds had put some tourniquets on him, and I checked him, and I started putting bandages around him to help stem the flow of blood.
Wow. I'm so glad that you did, and I'm sure, I know Dennis is as well, which is why he's never forgotten you. So to the question everybody is wondering, how the heck did you guys finally reconnect after 50 years? Tell us that story.
Well, what really happened, I tried for a number of years, and I had made contact with Ed and some of the others probably 10, 15 years after it happened, but we could never find Doc. We knew he was from Tennessee, and we kept trying. And then in 2014, and another individual that was there that day, I didn't know, Bill, Lena, or Doc.